My name is Jesse Vernon Presley, and I'm Elvis's brother. The brother he never knew existed, born while our father was in prison, hidden for 40 years, and now I want my share of everything." The man standing in Graceland's foyer on September 15, 1975, looked exactly like a younger Vernon, same jawline, same eyes, same way of standing with his weight on his left leg. But it was the birth certificate he held that made Elvis's knees buckle. Born January 8, 1939, exactly 4 years after Elvis, same birthday, different mother. Vernon went white as a sheet, Priscilla gasped, and Elvis said the only thing he could think of, "Jesse, like my dead twin." The man smiled coldly. "Daddy always did like recycling names. Difference is, I lived, and I've been living in hell while you lived in heaven. Time to balance the scales, brother." What happened in the next 72 hours would tear the Presley family apart, expose Vernon's darkest secret, and reveal that Elvis hadn't been an only child since 1939. He'd just been the only child Vernon acknowledged. To understand how Vernon Presley managed to hide a son for 36 years, we need to go back to 1938. Vernon was in Mississippi State Penitentiary, sentenced to 3 years for forging a check. Gladys was alone with 3-year-old Elvis, struggling to survive. But Vernon wasn't alone in prison. He'd fallen into a relationship with Lorraine Hawkins, a prison nurse who believed she could save him from his criminal ways. When intimacy between guard and prisoner was discovered, Lorraine was fired. When she discovered she was pregnant, Vernon was already denying everything. January 8, 1939. The same day Elvis turned 4, Lorraine gave birth to a boy in a charity ward in Jackson, Mississippi. She named him Jesse Vernon. Jesse for Vernon's dead son, Vernon for the father who would never claim him. She sent word to the prison, begging Vernon to acknowledge the child. Vernon's response was brutal. "I don't know you. I don't know that baby. If you contact me again, I'll make sure you regret it. Have you ever discovered your parent was capable of cruelty you couldn't imagine?" Lorraine raised Jesse alone, moving to Arkansas to escape the shame. She told her son his father died in the war. But children have a way of discovering the truth. When Jesse was 15, he found his birth certificate with Vernon's name, found newspaper clippings about Elvis Presley's father, and realized his father wasn't dead. He was just dead to him. The discovery that he had a famous brother who lived in a mansion while he lived in poverty planted a seed of resentment that would grow for 20 years. Jesse tried to contact Vernon in 1960 when he turned 21. He wrote a letter, included his birth certificate, demanded nothing except acknowledgement. Vernon's response came through a lawyer. "Any further contact will result in legal action. No biological connection exists." But Vernon also did something that would come back to haunt him. He started sending money. Not to Jesse, but to Lorraine, $500 a month to buy silence. He thought he was burying the problem. He was actually leaving a paper trail. September 14, 1975. Jesse's mother Lorraine died of cancer, but not before telling him everything. Vernon's threats, the money, the deliberate erasure of Jesse from history. She gave him a box of evidence, letters from Vernon begging her to get an abortion, signed checks for 35 years of hush money, and most damning, a photo of Vernon holding baby Jesse in the prison visiting room, the one time he'd acknowledged his son before deciding he was too inconvenient to exist. September 15, 1975. Jesse drove to Memphis in a truck held together with rust and rage. He'd spent weeks planning his approach, knowing Vernon would try to deny him again, but Jesse had something Vernon didn't expect. He'd hired a lawyer who'd already filed paternity papers in Mississippi court. The biological testing that would prove everything, and Jesse had timed it perfectly. Elvis was home, Priscilla was visiting with Lisa Marie, and several Memphis Mafia members were present. Maximum witnesses for maximum impact. When Jesse announced himself at Graceland's gate as Vernon Presley's son here to see his father, the security guard laughed. Then Jesse showed the birth certificate, and the laughter stopped. The guard called the main house. Vernon answered, heard the name and reportedly said, "Call the police." But Elvis overheard, grabbed the phone and said the words that changed everything. "If he's claiming to be family, let him in, we'll hear what he has to say." The confrontation in the foyer was electric. Jesse looked enough like Vernon that denial was impossible. But it was the evidence that destroyed Vernon's lies. The letters in Vernon's handwriting, the checks signed for 35 years, the photo of Vernon holding a baby that wasn't Elvis, and finally the DNA test results Jesse had arranged using hair from Vernon's barbershop. 99.7% probability of paternity. "You had another son," Jesse said to Vernon, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You had me. You abandoned me. You paid my mother to hide me. You let me grow up thinking I was nobody while my brother became everybody. I don't want your love. You're not capable of it. I want what I'm owed. Half of everything you've given Elvis, I want for the 36 years you stole from me." Elvis's reaction surprised everyone. Instead of anger at Jesse, he turned on Vernon. "Is this true? You had another son and never told me?" "I had a brother, a living brother, and you hid him?" Vernon's attempts at denial crumbled under Elvis's fury. "I lost Jesse Garon before I could know him, and you kept Jesse Vernon from me? You let me grieve a dead twin while a living brother was out there?" The math was staggering. Jesse's lawyer had calculated what half of Elvis's financial support from Vernon would be worth, not Elvis's earnings but what Vernon had given Elvis over the years. It came to roughly $2.5 million, but Jesse wanted more than money. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted to be a Presley publicly. He wanted what he called resurrection from the death Vernon sentenced me to. Have you ever met someone who had every right to hate you but chose justice instead? Jesse could have destroyed Elvis with the scandal. "Elvis has secret brother living in poverty" would have been devastating headlines. Instead, Jesse proposed a deal. He would sign a non-disclosure agreement, never go public, in exchange for three things. First, $2.5 million. Second, Vernon had to legally acknowledge him as his son. Third, and most surprisingly, he wanted a relationship with Elvis, not as a brother, but as someone who understands what Vernon's love costs. The next 3 days were negotiations and revelations. Elvis learned that Jesse was a mechanic, married with 2 kids, struggling but proud. That he'd followed Elvis's career not with jealousy, but with curiosity about the brother he never had. That he'd been at several Elvis concerts, standing in the back, wondering what it would be like to say, "That's my brother." But the most shocking revelation came from Vernon himself. Forced to confront his past, he admitted something that recontextualized Elvis's entire life. "I was planning to leave Gladys for Lorraine. If I hadn't gone to prison, Jesse would have been raised as your brother." The check forgery wasn't desperation, it was trying to get money to start a new life. "Gladys found out about Lorraine the day I was arrested. That's why she never visited me in prison, not because of shame, but because of betrayal." Elvis's world shattered. His sainted mother had known Vernon had another woman, another child coming. His father's crime wasn't just forgery, but attempted abandonment. The family mythology he'd built his identity on was a lie. Elvis looked at Jesse and said something that would define their relationship. "We're both Vernon's victims. Difference is you got to grow up without his shadow. I had to grow up thinking his shadow was shelter." The financial settlement was reached quickly. Elvis insisted on paying the $2.5 million himself, not wanting Vernon to have the satisfaction of fixing his own mistake. But the personal settlement was harder. How do you integrate a 36-year-old brother into a life that's already fractured? How do you explain to the world that Elvis has a brother without explaining why he was hidden? The cover story was crafted carefully. Jesse was a distant cousin who'd be helping with Graceland's maintenance. He was given a house in Memphis, a job with Elvis's enterprises, and something he'd never had, family acknowledgement. But privately, the relationship was complex. Elvis was fascinated by Jesse, seeing in him the normal life he might have had. Jesse was overwhelmed by Elvis's world, unable to comprehend the prison of fame his brother inhabited. They found connection in unexpected places. Both had Vernon's eyes but their mother's souls. Both had been shaped by Vernon's failures. Elvis by his presence, Jesse by his absence. They would sit up talking about what it meant to be Vernon's son, comparing damage like war veterans comparing wounds. Jesse would say, "At least he was there for you." Elvis would respond, "Being there isn't the same as being present." December 25, 1975. The first Christmas with both Vernon's sons at Graceland. Jesse's children called Elvis Uncle Elvis, not knowing he was really their uncle. Vernon sat silent, diminished, his lifetime of lies finally exposed. Priscilla watched it all with sad understanding. She'd always known Vernon was capable of cruelty, but not this level of erasure. Lisa Marie, 7 years old, was just happy to have cousins, not understanding the complex adult pain that brought them there. But the relationship couldn't hold. Jesse had spent too many years resenting Elvis to suddenly love him. Elvis had spent too many years being an only child to suddenly be a brother, and Vernon, the poison at the center of it all, worked to keep them separated, telling each son that the other was trying to manipulate them. By 1976, Jesse had retreated to his own life, taking the money but leaving the family. August 16, 1977. Elvis died. Jesse wasn't at the funeral. Vernon had made sure he wasn't invited. But Jesse came to Graceland that night, after everyone left, and stood at Elvis's grave. "We could have been brothers," he said to the fresh earth. "Real brothers, not Vernon's pawns, but he made sure we stayed strangers. Now you're gone, and I'm still the son he won't admit exists." Vernon died in 1979 without ever publicly acknowledging Jesse, but in his will there was a line that nobody understood at the time. To my surviving son, I leave my regrets. The surviving son wasn't Elvis, he was dead. It was Jesse, finally acknowledged in death if not in life. Jesse received nothing from the estate except that single line, but he framed it. "It's the only honest thing Vernon ever gave me," he said. Today, Jesse Vernon Presley is 85 years old, living quietly in Arkansas. He never went public with his story, honoring the agreement he made with Elvis. But sometimes Elvis fans report seeing an old man at Graceland, who looks remarkably like Vernon, standing at Elvis's grave, talking quietly. Security doesn't stop him. They know who he is, Elvis's brother, the one who lived, the one who was hidden, the one who might have saved Elvis if they'd been allowed to be brothers. In Jesse's home there's one photo of him and Elvis together, taken Christmas 1975. They're not looking at the camera but at each other, trying to see themselves in the other's face, trying to be brothers despite Vernon's lifetime of prevention. Under it, Jesse wrote, "For 3 months I had a brother. For 3 months Elvis had someone who understood. For 3 months we weren't Vernon's sons, we were each other's brothers. It wasn't enough, but it was everything. The secret son who lived, the famous son who died, and between them Vernon's legacy of lies, abandonment, and the cruelty of choosing which child deserved to exist in the light. Elvis died thinking he'd lost one brother at birth. He never knew he'd lost another brother, to Vernon's shame. Found him briefly at 40, and lost him again to the impossibility of healing 40 years of separation in 4 months of trying. My name is Jesse Vernon Presley, and I'm Elvis's brother. Words spoken once in Graceland's foyer, never spoken publicly again, but true forever. The brother Elvis never knew existed until it was almost too late. The brother who proved that Vernon's greatest talent wasn't managing Elvis's career. It was managing to hide his own cruelties until they couldn't be undone.